Good afternoon. I hope everyone is still awake for the last one, but I will do my best to keep you entertained. A little bit about myself. My name is Chris. I was born in the US. Our family moved to Hong Kong when I was 14. Ended up staying in Asia. After graduating, my mom forced me to do consulting, even though I wanted to do gaming. Eventually, in 2010, I ran away to Vietnam, got a job for my dream game company, and now I'm very happy, and my mom has accepted me for who I am. Ronan and AppsFlyer invited me here today, and I think I really want to focus on sharing what I really know, right? So obviously, I'm very curious about the Indian market, but I'm not going to be telling you anything about that, and I hope that later I will be able to learn from you. But I will share a little bit about my experience in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. So firstly, how is that really relevant, right? So I think the few things that I noticed was, number one, India and Vietnam are starting at a very similar economic point, right? A fast-growing economy, about 2,000 to 3,000 US dollar GDP per capita, and people in gaming, no one's really played Sony PlayStation or Nintendo, right? Everyone's mobile games are sort of many people's first experience to gaming, right? Number two, on a much smaller scale, Vietnam has, some barriers to entry, right? There is a license, but it's not as strict as China, so it's hard for a foreign player to get in. And I think in India, just because it's so diverse, it's been also very hard for foreign players to get in, right? So, and the third is that sort of idea about, when I started in Vietnam, it was, what games should I do? Right? What is gaming, right? It's not Nintendo, it's not Sony. Is it social casino? Is it casual? Is it esports? Is it RPG? So it's a really wide variety of things. And unless you're really in the game industry, it really confuses you hearing all these different terms: RPG, CBG, SLG. A lot of G means game, right? So I'll start with 3 phases of how VNG developed and really talk about how we overcame those challenges and how that might be relevant here. So VNG started in 2004. That time our CEO went to the World Cyber Games in South Korea, and he was like, wow, this is amazing. We should do the same thing in Vietnam. So he tried to get a lot of the Korean companies to give him one of their games, right? The online game that published in Vietnam, which would be the first one. But at that time, the Korean companies were busy trying to go into China, right? So he went to China, and then he met a guy named Lei Jun, who was the CEO of Kingsoft, and now is the CEO of Xiaomi. So Lei Jun basically said, wow, you came all the way from Vietnam. All right, take the game. Just take it. It's like a medium-level game, but just take it. So it ended up being a blessing in disguise, because what we found out was that a lot of the games from China at the time had very low specs, right? Because China at that time, also, the computers were not very high advanced like they were in South Korea. Right? And Vietnam, if we had taken a South Korean game, it would have been very hard for us. Maybe only 10% of the people could play it, right? So getting the Chinese game, which was our second choice, actually did really well for us, because it would exactly fit what Vietnam's market needed at the time. A second point of getting a Chinese game that I think is an important point is that in China at the time, like Vietnam and like India today, the wealth gap is very high. Right? It's not like in South Korea or Japan, where there's a big middle class where everyone can pay $5 or $10 for a game, right? Most people don't want to pay, but the whales can pay a lot of money, right? So that is how a lot of the Chinese games were designed at the time. And I know right now, in Southeast Asia as well, in India, many people are doing casual games, right? Social casino games, which are great. We do that too, right? But at the same time, you'll realize that you can get a lot of users, but the average revenue per user is quite low. So that makes it difficult, because the average person doesn't want to pay too much. And then the whales, they have nothing to pay for in your game, right? Like, there's guys in Vietnam who will spend $50,000 US dollars in a game, but you need a game that fits, that gives this person what he wants to pay for, right? So we started with, unlike a lot of other companies, we started directly with a hardcore game, MMORPG. Right? So why that worked was that we were able to really get the price discriminate and get a lot of revenue from some of the top users, and to build our business even further, right? Because what we realized is getting a big base of users actually is not worth it, because it's a big cost. You have to build a lot of infrastructure. The server cost is very high and it's difficult. There's a lot of bugs, right? But MMORPGs, maybe you just have 5 or 10% of the active users, but the average revenue for each user is very high, right? So that's what we did. The first thing we did was we realized that in Vietnam, no one could pay on Apple and Google. No one had a credit card, 1% credit card penetration, like 2005 or 6. We sent out a fleet of motorbikes across the country, going to all the 7-Elevens. We went to every single PC cafe where they play games, because there's no chain, and one by one convinced them to put in our card, right? Which they could scratch the card and let them pay in the game. So, for us as a job, as a publisher, that was basically our main job, was to distribute and make sure that people could pay. And then, of course, customer service. We did have a few small protests outside of our company at that time, but that's another story. But at the end of the day, for us, we started as a game publisher, right? So, and that journey has really led us from the beginning and come full circle, which I'll show you later. The next step, what happened was that in about 2008, we had an investment at that time. We had investment from IDG and a couple Korean companies, and a major one was Tencent, right? So which to today is still 30%. What we did was we looked at what they were doing, and we decided, okay, let's use the money we made from publishing to build social media. Today now we're sort of leading in terms of chat. People use Zalo in Vietnam. It's like the WhatsApp or the Kakao of Vietnam. We have music payment. People use Zalo Pay directly in Zalo to pay. And then we also do cloud and other businesses as well. So in Vietnam, we're a tech company. Outside Vietnam, we're a game company. Next on our journey, we realized around 2010, 2012 a time, we realized, okay, we're staying in Vietnam and we're doing very well, but companies like C Group, you guys know C Group, Free Fire, right? They started coming in, right? And they had ways to get the license from the government, right? Because they were rich, right? And then they were attacking us at our home turf. So we said, okay, we have to expand now. Right, so the next phase VNG really did at that time is that, okay, so we did a good job of bringing a lot of these games over to Vietnam. We made a lot of money from these high, average paying user games. We invested some of that to get other kinds of games. And now we can't just stay here and protect ourselves. Vietnam is small, right? It's not like India. So we started going overseas. So I know most Indian companies, if you get to scale, you'll probably become a global company because coming to a market like Thailand or Vietnam is too small for you. But if you're still a medium-sized or small-sized company, I think Southeast Asia culturally and geographically is very attractive for Indian companies. So the way we went to Southeast Asia is we said, hey, look at all the Korean and Japanese and Chinese companies. They're kind of using Singapore as a base. Right? And just, one size fits all, we'll do the same thing for every country. But as you guys know, Southeast Asia is not Europe, right? There's different religions, different people, different political systems, islands, right? So it's a very disparate system. So the model that we did there is that, okay, we have to be local, right? But we can't be too local. Because if we made a team in every single country that called everything, then people are just going to argue. Hey, if we take a game from Korea and we publish it in Southeast Asia, right? Who gets the priority? Is it the Indonesia team? Is it the Thailand team? Is it the Vietnam team, right? So we did a model where we said, okay, each team can support a proposal to be a product owner, right? So whoever is the product owner is the one who manages the contact with the publisher, right? When I talk about the publishing business, it means taking someone else's game, localizing for your market, right? This team will then coordinate with all the local teams on the master plan for marketing. But on the version plan, the operations, which server to use, how to update the version, that is done by the product owner. But the master plan, once it gets to Thailand, the local team chooses the KOLs, they do the UA, right? And they choose every single PR marketing firm, they do the local holidays and operations, right? So that's the model that we decided to use. We've seen C Group, Free Fire also doing similar models as well. And I think for that is been a really important for us because I think that once you venture further into the game industry, you will realize that the big thing that companies in Vietnam, in Southeast Asia are missing is one thing. You will realize it's the game design, right? So over here in India, there are a lot of good developers. Vietnam has a lot of good developers as well, right? So why are we publishing Korean and Chinese games, right? Why are we not just doing our own games? When we do our own games, a lot of casual, mid-casual games, they can do very good for the core looks great, the gameplay is great, right? Everything looks amazing. But after a month or two or three, how do I keep the users engaged? Right? How do I build that community? How do I get feedback? How do I build events that keep people paying and people playing? Right? How do these games last for 3 or 4 years or 5 years? Right? Like a Genshin Impact. So we realized that is is the main thing that's missing, not the technical side. The technical side, optimizing specs, very important, right? But I think you have that here. What is missing is experience to take a game that go from 3 months to 1 year and from 1 year to 3 years, right? That is the game design side that we missed out on. And how do you really get that experience to do that, right? So there's no really easy answer for that, but it's really experience, right? It's really not rocket science, right? So what we saw what the Chinese did is that they sent their guys over to Korea, they got Korean guys to go to China, and then they kind of learned and built up from that, okay? But now what they're doing is very interesting to me. If you look at Genshin Impact or some of these big popular games from China, the developers and technical team is in China. The whole world building and story is outside of China, right? The whole idea of, the artwork is done in Japan or somewhere else, right? The story, the art, the writing is done somewhere else. So there's this one famous game called Lords Mobile, right? It's a strategy game that did pretty okay globally, pretty well globally, sorry. So there was one producer there, he worked in the Middle East, and what he did was he left the company, he built his own company, he took the same exact game, and he made it called Game of Sultans instead of Lords Mobile. And what happened is he pushed that in the Middle East market. He knew that was a market that was very similar, high payment for a small amount of users, right? And he pushed that there, and I think that game made $200 or $300 million in the first year, right, globally, right? So that's, for me, when we looked at, if we come to somewhere like India or some other country in South Asia, like, could we work with something for a hardcore game, an action game, which had the sort of game design background, monetization, and the live ops built in already from proven games, and have locals build on the artwork, the world building, right, and how to move that forward, right? So I think that is a good model for going forward, because that's basically what we did for our first game, right? We took the game from China and we localized it to fit what people in Vietnam wanted. I really use that example of that because I think that if we stay in this current cycle, like a lot of developers in Vietnam are doing, is that you're building a lot of casual games, you're recycling them after 3 months, 6 months, you're building another one. You're not creating real connection with the users. You're not really creating real understanding with the user if he leaves in a week or a month, right? So what we think that we should do is do more hardcore games in the beginning, work with some of the people who have experience, bring them over here, right? If you need, work with them, and then level up your own people and build that community and brand. So for the first game that we did in Vietnam, the one that we took from Lei Jun, made about $1 million a month. Pretty good in Vietnam at the time, right? Then we did the browser-based version of the game, like the Facebook version, and made about $2 million a month. 3.5 years ago, we launched the mobile version of the game. First month was $9 million in Vietnam only, right? So why did it happen when we did our research is because a lot of the kids who played the game when it first came out, they didn't have any money. And now when the mobile game came out about 7, 8 years later, they had a lot of money, right? So they were willing to spend and they had that affection and emotion in the game. So I urge you that, if you're a platform and you're looking to make quick money, casual games and social casino games are great, right? But if you want to be a game developer or a game company, right, that's really long term, I do feel like investing more time and effort into some of these games that can help build a connection, or like a long-term life cycle for the game, is much more, sustainable in the long term, right? Because once you have those users there for a long time, you understand them so much better. You see when they log on, you see what they like paying for, you see which events are attractive to them, you see what social functions they don't like, right? And with that data team and system, that's really what is valuable, right? I think AppsFlyer can tell all of you how valuable that is. And with the new IDFA regulations, we can't really outsource our market research and data to ad platforms as well anymore. We have to do it ourselves, right? So I think getting and investing in some of these games, whether they're casual or longer term, to really have a good understanding of how some of the top players are analyzing these actions and what events and updates they're making, at what time intervals, how they're pricing the events, right? getting that experience is for us is something that seems easy and it's not too hard to do, but we have to take the action to do it. And then now reaching sort of the final step of the journey, what we realized is, okay, now we want to go IPO, and we look at the game market across the world and say, okay, if we want to compete, we can't just be a regional company anymore. We can't just stay in Southeast Asia anymore, right? So I moved to Thailand about 3 years ago for VNG, starting our office. Met my wife there, living a happy life there. But our boss said, hey, you know, if we just keep being a game publisher, we're not going to survive, right? Netflix eventually started making their own content, and so do we. Right? So now my job is doing investments. So what are we looking for when we're looking at investments right now? Yes, we did invest in Web3 a little bit. Okay, that was definitely one of the more learning experiences. But our core goal is really number one, to invest in development studios, right? And how do we really assess these development studios? Right, and it's fascinating when we go to Korea and China now, how many people ask about the South Asia market. Right, how many people are fascinated about that? Because one of our strategies is actually to open an office here in South Asia. We just don't know where yet, right? So, and I think that when you're going and now you're investing into these companies, you're looking for people who have two things. One is the game design experience, and number two is really that UA global experience, right? So I think a lot of people are talking about, you know, I read a lot of articles about performance marketing in India. Is it good? Is it hard? Is it bad? Is it not? But I do think one of the main things that I've seen successful UA companies really do when they're doing that is really having, really having people who've had experience doing UA in different markets, right? If you've just done UA in one major market, even if it's a big market, that's great, right? But the amount of learning you can do when you go to different markets across the globe, even if it's a smaller market, like for example, going to Philippines and doing a UA there, I've seen the best UA people are people who've had the budgets and experience to do UA in multiple markets, rather than just their own home market, right? And they often bring the experiences back to their home markets. For example, we hired someone as a consultant from Rise of Kingdoms. What they do when they do their UA now is they make 1,000 different videos or banners before they do a UA. And then what they do is they test all of the banners, see which one has the best return, right? And then what they do is some of those games, the mini games they do, are not even in the game. So Apple and Google don't let you ban them because it's a fake game, right? You're making a lot of these puzzle games not in there. So what they do is it's called UA-led game design. The UA person will go to the game designer and say, make this game inside your game. Make this small casual game where you do the small puzzles in your game, right? Make it just a mini game as a part of your game. And then we'll be able to use this for UA. It'll be very effective, right? Apple and Google will not block you, right? And then, you know, the UA cost will be a lot lower, right? I just think that when we're doing UA these days, I see a lot of people sort of stuck in the same loop, doing the same thing, right? Trying to get the same users and recycle them doing the same thing. We were doing that for the longest time, right? And then I think we realized at some point that we need help, right? That it's not so simple to just, you know, it's not so simple to look at, okay, this user gives me this much ROI and this is a good user, right? There's actually a lot of different ways to optimize and do the UA better. Right. And lastly, you know, where we are right now as a game company, our journey started from game publishing, right? And I think game publishing is great because everyone wants to be a game developer first, and it's simple if you're doing casual games. I think it's a great way to start. But game publishing really worked for us because you're taking a successful game from another market and you're localizing it. So it's kind of a cheat code, right? When you're having your localization people working with their people on doing events, and you're like, we should do it like this. They're telling you why you shouldn't do it like this, right? Because they've had experience there, and you're giving them local insight to say, okay, let's find something in the middle, right? So I think the reason why in Vietnam, at least for VNG, the development has been quite successful in the past few years is because we transferred from being a publisher and taking other people's games, and not just saying, like, for example, you have a payment platform or whatever, and I'm just driving users to your game, give me money, right? Don't do that, right? Like, okay, even if you have to spend more effort, get involved in the operations and marketing a little bit, right? Get involved in what they're doing. Oh, why did you do this event, you know, for Diwali? Why did you do it this way, right? Oh, actually, I just took a Chinese New Year event, and I did the same thing for Diwali, right? Okay, fine. So the numbers and design are probably pretty good. Now, how do I change that to localize it, to make it work for India, right? So I think for us, we were very lucky that we had people who really followed that game design very closely and really learned from them exactly what they were doing. And you can utilize that then in your games as well too. Right, so I just think that from here on out, we talk a lot about game development. That's definitely something we want to do, but you have to start somewhere from publishing first as well too, and working with other people on games as well. I've come to the markets a lot. You know, the easiest game to always do is FPS, is a shooter, right? Because you don't have to read much, you don't have to understand much, you just shoot, right? And I think that's a great way, but you know, when we look at the genres, I would say the shooters are nice, but it's very hard to do because it's winner takes all, right? Like you know, it's really hard to have multiple big ones there as well too, doing well, and also the server cost is very high, right? Because you need a really high ping for it to work well. So my suggestion would be, you know, looking at the market, when I talk to people in East Northeast Asia, not knowing as much here as I want to, I would say that looking at a hardcore game strategy, looking at games that are a little bit more RPG, or card battle, turn-based strategy, right? Some of these mid-core to hardcore games, I think are things that Indian game companies should be looking at. Those are going to give you long-term value, drive for your business, and strong return and fast return, right? RPG, our return is definitely 2 to 3 months, generally to break even, right, for RPG. But for some of these casual games, it might be a year or longer, right? Because you have to keep doing UA. So, you know, coming here, just sharing from my experience about how we really grew as a company, right? I would say, number one, focus on where you're getting the games from. Focus on the technical and the specs. Know your users well. Really target and learn from global and different markets. Focus on the genre you're doing. Look for long life cycle games. Don't do games that just for fast money. If you do get fast money, that's great, but use it to do more sustainable things as well too. And then finally, you know, the last thing I'd like to end with is, please, we're definitely very interested to learn more about the Indian market. I think Southeast Asia is also a very fascinating market for you guys to visit as well. I flew here from Bangkok 4 hours or something. It's a pretty easy flight. So if you guys are ever in town or Ho Chi Minh City, since I'm back and forth, please let me know. And thank you all for listening.